What do you feel when you look at a photograph of a woman with a gun? Something between awe, discomfort, and fascination. During the Algerian War of Independence, both the French army and the Algerian resistance used images of women for their own political ends. But when we look at photographs that women themselves created and safeguarded in their own collections for decades, a different history emerges. Women were assumed to be passive subjects, secondary to men. But in my research of the photographic archive, I discovered women who were image makers behind the camera, armed combatants at the front line, trained nurses who provided life-saving care, and even were creators of the first Algerian flag. The Algerian War of Independence was fought between France and Algeria from 1954 to 1962, and it ended over 100 years of French colonial rule. It was also strategically photographed by both sides. The French army used images of Algerian women to justify colonial rule, casting them as victims in need of civilizing, or as terrorists threatening the French state. The Algerian resistance did something remarkably similar, recasting those same women as nationalist symbols of Algerian resistance. And in both cases, the complexity and stories of who these women really were gets lost. And in my research, I wanted to recover those stories. One of the images that stayed with me is a small carbon print of a young Algerian woman named Zohra Slimi, seated at a sewing table, making Algerian flags by hand. It's not the kind of image that would have been found on the cover of a magazine or a newspaper, but it remains a historical artifact and appears in my dissertation because she safeguarded this image for decades in her own collection. As an art historian, I'm trained to look very closely at images. And I spent years looking at over 20 archives in 4 different countries conducting this research. From military holdings in rural France, photo agencies in Paris and Toronto, Canada, and personal collections as well from Algeria and even New York. My research considered the visual aspects, but also the tear sheets, the captions, and the cataloging systems, all the parts of the institutional machinery that decides which images become history and which remain unseen. The images I'm most proud of in my dissertation are those that have never been published, never exhibited, and in some cases, never seen outside of a family's home. That invisibility is part of the story that I aim to tell. When we center the photographers that these women really were, and how they were subjects of these images, but also safeguarders of these images too, we see how essential their roles are in the Algerian resistance. The Algerian War ended over 60 years ago, but the lives of these women are still very present in its aftermath, and will certainly remain alive in me. And it's actually part of the reason the next stage of my career is taking on full-time work at the International Center of Photography in the Lower East Side, where in that collection, I hope to continue to discover more about women in this liberation movement. Thank you.